Before 396 BC, Veii wasn't just another Etruscan city. It was one of the most powerful, perhaps the most powerful, in the Latium region. The city sat on a naturally fortified plateau, surrounded on three sides by deep ravines. It had direct access to the Cremera River, controlled vital trade routes, and possessed salt mines, the most valuable resource of antiquity. Rome and Veii fought over control of the salt flats for generations. But here's what most people don't know. Veii was larger than Rome. Archaeological excavations show that Veii covered approximately 190 hectares within its walls. Rome, in the same period, covered about 285 hectares, similar numbers. But population density and wealth? Veii probably surpassed Rome. And here's the disturbing detail the Roman sources mention, casually. Veii had a tunnel system. Livy describes that during the siege, Roman engineers dug a tunnel under Veii's walls to penetrate the city. But when you read carefully, you notice something strange. The Romans weren't digging through virgin earth. They were using and expanding tunnels that already existed. Veii had a network of drainage tunnels, underground aqueducts, and passages carved into rock that rivaled Rome's own Cloaca Maxima, advanced Etruscan engineering. And some of these tunnels still exist today, more than 2,400 years later. Now consider what this means. Veii had hydraulic infrastructure comparable to Rome. It had comparable wealth. It had comparable population. And it was only 16 kilometers away. For centuries, the two cities coexisted. They fought occasional wars, yes, but they also traded, competed, influenced each other. Archaeological evidence shows Roman pottery in Veii and Veientine pottery in Rome. Coins, artifacts, deep cultural connections. So why, in 406 BC, did Rome initiate a siege that would last 10 years and end not in conquest but in total obliteration? The official answer is simple: territorial rivalry, control of the salt flats, natural Roman expansion. But this explanation becomes impossible to maintain when you examine what happened during the siege and what happened after. Because the siege of Veii wasn't a normal military operation. It was something much more systematic, much more coordinated, and much more brutal than a simple territorial war would justify. Livy writes that the siege lasted 10 years. 10 years. For a city 16 kilometers from Rome, a city that could be reached in less than half a day's walk. How can a siege last 10 years when supply lines are so short? How did a city so close resist so long against an enemy that could easily keep fresh troops in the field? And here's the part nobody questions. During these 10 years, Rome supposedly maintained a permanent army besieging Veii. But Rome didn't yet have professional armies in 406 BC. Roman soldiers were citizen farmers who fought during campaign season and returned home for harvest. A 10-year siege would require soldiers to stay in the field during winter, to abandon their farms for years, to be paid somehow to remain in continuous military service. And according to Livy, that's exactly what happened. Rome, for the first time in its history, paid its soldiers, established the first professional army, kept troops in the field year-round, all to besiege a city 16 kilometers away. Why? What was in Veii that justified this unprecedented level of military commitment? What made this city so crucial or so dangerous that Rome was willing to fundamentally transform its own military structure to destroy it? The siege began in 406 BC, and immediately something strange happened. Other Etruscan cities didn't come to Veii's rescue. Think about it. Veii was a member of the Etruscan League of 12 cities. When Tarquinius Superbus tried to retake Rome decades earlier, multiple Etruscan cities intervened. When Rome threatened any Etruscan city, others provided support. But when Rome besieged Veii, one of the most important cities in Etruria, for 10 years, silence. Sources mention that some Etruscan cities sent occasional help, but nothing substantial. No coordinated effort to break the siege. No significant military intervention. Why? Why did the Etruscan League abandon one of its major cities? The official explanation: internal conflicts, political disputes, lack of coordination, but that doesn't explain the complete absence of support during an entire decade. Unless the other Etruscan cities knew something, unless the siege of Veii wasn't really about territory or salt, unless it was about something the other cities also wanted to see destroyed. During the siege, strange events began to happen. Livy reports prodigies, signs from the gods. Lake Albano mysteriously rose, overflowing without rain. Oracles were consulted. Etruscan haruspices were brought in. And here's the disturbing detail. The haruspices told the Romans that Veii couldn't be conquered while the waters of Lake Albano flowed to the sea. Rome would need to drain the lake through tunnels. And they did. They excavated tunnels through solid rock to drain Lake Albano. And those tunnels still exist today. You can visit them. Advanced Roman engineering, or actually captured Etruscan engineers working for Rome. But here's the real question. Why would draining a lake have any relation to conquering a city? The connection isn't military, it's religious, ritual. As if the siege of Veii wasn't just a military operation, but a sacred act, an eradication not just of a city, but of something spiritual, something that needed to be removed with divine blessing. And then came the final tunnel. Marcus Furius Camillus, the Roman general, ordered engineers to dig a tunnel under Veii's walls. But not to just any part of the city. The tunnel was directed specifically to the temple of Juno, Veii's principal deity. Livy describes vividly, the Romans emerged from the tunnel directly inside the temple, while Veii's priests were performing sacrifices. Roman soldiers massacred the priests at the altar, plundered the temple, and took the statue of Juno to Rome. This wasn't normal military tactics. It was deliberate violation of the city's most sacred space. It was ritual desecration, as if the goal wasn't just to conquer Veii, but to destroy its spiritual soul. And after the city fell, what Rome did was even more disturbing. When Veii finally fell in 396 BC, the destruction was total. Livy reports that the entire population was massacred or sold as slaves. The entire population. The men killed. The women and children enslaved. The city completely plundered. Veii's treasures were taken to Rome. The statue of Juno was installed on the Aventine. The loot was so massive that, according to sources, every Roman soldier received a substantial share. And then Rome abandoned the city, didn't establish a colony, didn't move Roman population there, didn't use the existing structures. A city with advanced infrastructure, excellent defensive walls, access to water, perfect strategic location, and Rome simply left it empty. This is incomprehensible from a military and economic standpoint. When Alexander the Great conquered cities, he repopulated them. When Romans conquered other cities, even cities much farther than Veii, they established colonies. But Veii, only 16 kilometers from Rome, abandoned for centuries. Archaeological evidence shows a massive population gap in Veii after 396 BC. The city remained essentially uninhabited until the Roman imperial period, almost 400 years later. Why? The official explanation suggests the destruction was so complete the city was no longer habitable. But the physical structures were still there, the walls still standing, the tunnels still functional, the land still fertile. Unless the problem wasn't physical, unless there was something in Veii that Rome wanted to ensure would never be rebuilt, something that needed to remain destroyed. And here's where the conspiracy becomes impossible to ignore. After Veii's fall, Rome began a systematic process of destroying all other Etruscan cities in the same region. Fidense, an Etruscan city only 8 kilometers north of Rome, destroyed in 435 BC. Falerii, conquered in 241 BC. Population forced to move to a new location. Ancient city abandoned. Capena, Nepet, Sutrium, all Etruscan cities near Rome, all conquered and either destroyed or severely repopulated in the decades following Veii's fall. These weren't opportunistic conquests. It was systematic elimination of Etruscan cities in a specific radius around Rome, as if Rome was creating an Etruscan-free zone, erasing population centers that could preserve memory, culture, records, and the most disturbing evidence of all, the tunnels. Remember the tunnels under Veii? Those advanced drainage and aqueduct systems? After the city's fall, Rome began to seal many of these tunnels. Not to use them, to close them. Why? If you just conquered a city with advanced hydraulic infrastructure, why would you destroy that infrastructure? Unless the tunnels led to something, unless they connected to something, unless there were reasons to ensure nobody could explore them again. Now let's consider what archaeological evidence actually shows about Veii. Because the more you examine the city, the more the official pattern of simple territorial rivalry falls apart. Veii's tunnels weren't just for drainage. Modern excavations have revealed that the tunnel system under Veii was much more extensive than ancient sources suggest. Some tunnels extend for kilometers. Others connect areas that have no obvious hydraulic function. And here's the disturbing detail. Some of these tunnels appear to have been sealed from within. They didn't collapse naturally. They were deliberately blocked, filled with rubble, made inaccessible. When did this happen? Dating is uncertain, but evidence suggests many were sealed shortly after 396 BC, during or immediately after the Roman conquest. What was in these tunnels that needed to be sealed? Veii's temples contained something Rome wanted. Remember, the Roman attack tunnel was directed specifically to the Temple of Juno, not to the weakest walls, not to the gates, not to residential areas, to the main temple. And after the conquest, Rome transported Juno's statue to Rome with great ceremony. But sources also mention that other sacred objects were taken. Religious texts, cult objects, artifacts that Livy vaguely describes as sacred things of the gods. What were these objects? Why were they important enough to be specifically mentioned and transported to Rome? And here's the part that haunts me. After taking these objects, Rome left Veii's temples in ruins. Didn't convert them for Roman use, as they did with other conquered temples. Didn't reconsecrate them to Roman gods. Simply let them decay, as if the goal was to remove something specific and then ensure the place where it had been would never be used again. Veii's population disappeared completely. When Rome conquered other cities, even after brutal massacres, there were always survivors. Refugees who fled to neighboring cities, slaves who were eventually freed, exile communities that maintained cultural identity. But Veii? No documented refugee communities, no group of Veientines mentioned in other cities, no oral tradition preserved by descendants. It's as if Veii's population had been completely erased. not just killed or enslaved, but removed so completely that no cultural trace survived. And when you compare this to how Rome treated other conquered cities, even hated enemies, Veii's erasure is unique, absolute, systematic. Veii's written records never existed. We know Veii was a rich, powerful, culturally sophisticated city. Archaeological evidence shows advanced art, complex engineering, extensive trade. Cities like this kept records, religious texts, historical annals, commercial treaties. We know other Etruscan cities had libraries because Roman sources mention them. But from Veii, not a single text survived, not a single long inscription, just a few words on pottery fragments. Compare with Tarquinia, Caere, Volsi, other Etruscan cities that were also eventually conquered by Rome. From these cities, we have inscriptions, texts, written evidence of their culture and history. But Veii, the city closest to Rome, Rome's first major Etruscan conquest. Total documentary silence. As if someone had ensured nothing written in Veii would survive. So what really happened in 396 BC? I can't prove it definitively. The evidence was destroyed over 2,000 years ago, but I can show you the pattern, and the pattern suggests something far beyond territorial rivalry. Veii wasn't conquered, it was eliminated. Rome didn't want Veii's territory, they left the city empty for centuries. Rome didn't want Veii's population, they massacred or enslaved everyone until no community survived. Rome didn't want Veii's infrastructure, they sealed the tunnels and left the temples in ruins. So what did Rome really want? The answer lies in what Rome took from Veii before destroying it. Juno's statue and sacred objects of the gods. Specific knowledge of the tunnels. Something from the temples that needed to be removed before destruction. And it lies in what Rome did after destroying Veii. Completely abandoned a perfectly usable city 16 kilometers away. Initiated systematic elimination of other nearby Etruscan cities. Ensured no written record of Veii survived. Sealed tunnels that could contain what? The official narrative says it was about salt and territory. But salt doesn't justify a 10-year siege. Territory doesn't explain abandoning a conquered city. Rivalry doesn't explain erasure so complete that even the memory of Veii almost disappeared. Unless Veii knew something. Unless Veii guarded something. Unless Veii represented something that Rome, which was, remember, only recently separated from its own Etruscan kings, needed to destroy to complete its new identity as a Roman republic. Because here's the disturbing truth. Veii was the Etruscan city closest to Rome. For centuries, the two cities were practically indistinguishable culturally. Same construction techniques, same religious practices, same engineering, same political organization. Veii was a mirror that reflected what Rome really was under its new republican facade. A mirror that preserved memory, traditions, records of the Etruscan world Rome was trying to leave behind. And mirrors can be dangerous, especially when you're trying to convince the world and yourself that you're something you're not. So Rome broke the mirror, massacred the population, plundered the temples, sealed the tunnels, left the city empty, and ensured nobody could rebuild what was destroyed. The massacre of Veii wasn't about conquest. It was about erasure. It was about destroying evidence of who Rome really was. And it worked. So well that 2,400 years later, we still accept the story that it was just about salt. The evidence is there. In the sealed tunnels, in the ruined temples, in the documentary silence, in the impossible absence of any surviving Veientine community. Once you see it, you can't unsee it. Veii had to die. Not because it was Rome's rival, but because it was Rome's sister. And Rome needed nobody to remember that. The evidence is buried, literally, and Rome wants it to stay that way.